Hey guys. So we've had a lot of questions about editorial licensing. There's a lot of confusion out there about what can be licensed editorially, what's safe for commercial licensing, and so we wanted to clear up some of those misconceptions and some of the confusion over what's safe for commercial and what you can submit and what you can't submit. So we put together a few points for everyone. We're going to go over them with you to make it a little easier. Some questions you can ask yourself before you submit, and hopefully it'll make the whole process a little more transparent for you guys, a little bit more visibility into the submission process.
Should we introduce ourselves?
Oh yeah, we should do that too. Yeah. In case you haven't seen our mugs before.
Yeah. So I'm Nuno Silva. I'm the Director of Content here at 500px.
Yeah, and I'm Heather Balmain. I'm a content editor here. So.
Cool. So now we can officially get started. Yeah. Now that we have the intros out of the way, and we'll just we have a small little slideshow that kind of goes along with our presentation. And I think the first thing that we're going to talk about is going to be commercial photos, and basically defining what the difference is between what we mean by commercial and what we mean by editorial. And so the definition is going to be different than maybe what you've heard, in the sense that editorial is used for a lot of different things. A lot of people think fashion spreads are editorial, which is true in that context. And other people think that news and journalism is editorial, and that's where it kind of applies a little bit more in our context of commercial licensing. And that's what we're really going to talk about here, is the difference between commercial usage and then editorial usage. And when we say the word editorial, we mean that in the context of it being newsworthy, journalistic, or educational, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, Heather, do you want to start us off on what a commercial photo is? What do we mean by commercial?
So commercial images are used for advertising. They're basically used as promotional tools. They're used to promote services, products, like a vast range of things, like globally. So you want them to be aspirational. They should be creative and aspirational. They're selling something. And so, you know, our buyers are going to make money essentially from these. That's what we mean by commercial. So if they're trying to sell something, they're selling a lifestyle, they're selling an idea. So we want the images to sort of be more positive and aspirational in that sense. So we also mean that we also need the people that are in these images to be released. They have to be released. They have to give their consent, because these images could show up on billboards. They're going to show up in ads. They could be online. You could see them on the side of a bus somewhere. So the people who are visible in these images have to have given their consent. Everybody, not just one person. Anyone who's recognizable has to sign a release. And there's some very specific wording, which we've already covered in our model release talk that we've done. So.
Right, and basically what it boils down to is that somebody is profiting from the likeness of that individual, which kind of brings us to the next point about logos and other trademarks that need to be removed. And that's because you can't use somebody else's logo or trademark in order to make money off of that, or in order to have it in your advertisement. There's certain limitations to the fair use clause when it comes to advertising, which not only applies to using people or people's likenesses, but also logos and trademarks in your advertising or commercial products. And so basically this is a way for us to help our buyers protect themselves, and to open up the range of buyers that can use the content, and open up the types of usage for the content. So that's why we kind of enforce that, and are looking for primarily commercial photos. To give you guys a bit of context, at 500px, commercial photos outsell editorial photos significantly. And that shouldn't say that editorial photos don't have a value. Commercial photos obviously have a greater value and a greater usage because of these restrictions and these restrictions that we place on the photos. And so you can actually use a commercial photo for editorial purposes, again, widening the range of usage. Yeah, so we have some examples that Heather's put together of types of commercial usages. So do you want to just go through them?
Yeah, so some of the commercial usages include advertising in print and digital media campaigns. They get used in marketing and promotional materials, corporate presentations, brochures, websites, product packaging, film and television, books and book covers. Those are just a few of the things. And I know, I'm sure you have too. I know I've walked into stores and I've seen images that that I've produced or that I've worked on or edited, and I've seen them on the sides of packaging. I've seen them all over the place. I've seen them in malls and everywhere. So that's why we have to be so careful.
And this is typically what most people think what stock photography is. It's a commercial usage of photography in these sort of areas, and the photos could be manipulated and cropped and changed up. There are some protections in our license agreement which prevent unlawful use of a photo, so they can't be used on like hate literature or anything that would just destroy the character of the person in the photo. You can't use a photo and have somebody claim to be somebody, you know what I mean? So
yeah.
There are some restrictions in the license agreement, and we do protect our photographers as well when it comes to commercial usage. And there are limitations on the kind of usage that's covered under our license, including sensitive use clauses. So are there exceptions?
There are exceptions. So some of the exceptions for commercial use would be crowds. So, where someone is isolated, when someone is featured in a photo, they're always going to need a release. When you can see their face and their features or recognize them through context, they're always going to need a release. But the exception would be crowds, where there's a group of people and no one person can be the focus. No one person is featured. Somewhere like a market where the crowd is sort of organic, coming together. It's a street scene. It's a market. Then there's some leeway there, and it's sort of case by case. You have to consider the context. You have to consider where are they, how many people, and what is the point of the photo. So is the focus the market? Is that the point of the photo? Is that what the main focus is? And in these cases, you might be able to see some faces, but it's really not about that person. Then it's probably okay for commercial licensing.
Yeah, and one thing that we consider as editors is the ability for somebody to crop somebody out. So that's where it gets kind of tricky, where, and it's always on a case-by-case basis. So when we're looking at these photos, we say, what is the likelihood of somebody being singled out in this scene and claiming that somebody's profiting from their likeness? And so although you might have a crowd scene, if somebody's front and center and the main focus, or even if they're not, but they could easily be cropped into that, we just try to protect you and protect our buyers in the sense that we want to make sure that it's very cut and dry that this is a commercial usage or an editorial usage, even with cropping and altering of the photos. So it's a little tricky, very subjective, and it's something that it takes human editors to do. We don't have a machine back there vetting this content. We have a bunch of humans out there that are making subjective calls.
And we talk about it. We review it together, and it's not just one person sort of like, hey, yes, no. It's like, we talk about it, and there's various different details to think about and consider, and each case is different. So yeah, we take it seriously. Yeah, the other exception is logos, and it's kind of the same idea. It's the same way that with people, if you've got multiple logos, if there's more than one and you've got a group of logos and there's no particular logo that stands out more than the others, it's not the feature of the main focus of the image. Then it's probably okay. If you have a skyline that's full of logos, like Hong Kong is a classic one where there's just loads and loads of logos. There's Hitachi and all sorts of stuff, and some of them are a little bigger than the others, but there's just logos everywhere, and it's really difficult to shoot that skyline without getting logos in it. It's hard to avoid. So in that case, it would depend on the angle and just how bright it is, or which ones stand out. But in a lot of cases, we can accept that for commercial licensing because there's a lot of logos and the focus isn't on any one brand. That brand couldn't claim that the image was about them. It's clearly about the skyline, about the city skyline. So.
And all these rules and restrictions, they're not created by 500px. They're international copyright, fair use, and trademark laws that we abide by, and they're set forth as sort of standards amongst commercial and editorial and fair use of photos and likenesses and trademarks. And again, it's a very subjective call a lot of the times. And as long as no individual trademark can be singled out, typically it's okay. And that's where we kind of make those calls. And the laws change. Certain trademarks or property owners will make claims and will contact us and will let us know about things. And so things will change, and we'll adapt to them, and we'll continue to inform our photographers on those standards.
Yeah, we keep up to date on those. And if anyone ever has any questions, you can always email support and ask, because we'll let you know. We're on it. And it's hard to give people answers. That's the other thing. It's why we're doing this, for one, but also because each case is different. It really is difficult to give people a definitive answer until we can see the image and really look at it.
Yeah. So when you write in, make sure you do send us a photo example. Like I've mentioned a couple of times, it's subjective and it's really on a case-by-case basis. And hopefully this presentation gives you the general overview of the distinction and the line that we're trying to draw here. So let's move on to what are editorial photos.
Okay, so editorial photos are images that are not released. Generally, those people in these images are sort of incidental to the image. They're not someone known to the photographer necessarily. They are people who are passing or just part of the scene, and they're not released in any way. So, and the same goes for locations as well, by the way. It's not just about people, it's also about private locations and private property. So these places are unreleased. And so they can only be used in a journalistic or informative way. They can't be used to sell anything. They can't be used for commercial purposes. So it's really imperative that we're aware of that, and we know we can't take chances.
Well, and because they're used in this way, they're used for journalism or educational purposes, they have to be truthful representations of those things. And as Heather mentioned, that people are incidental. They are incidental, but they're more candid. They're not posed. They're not staged. And then that also goes to the post-processing, where you can't have altered the image in such a way that is no longer truthful of the scene. So as silly as it sounds, you can't have a scene that has a purple sky, because that doesn't make sense. The sky wasn't purple back then for whatever reason. There's all kinds of weird things that we see when we're editing the photos. We're seeing like extreme HDRs, we're seeing composites, we're seeing people inserted into scenes, people removed from scenes, which alters the truthfulness of the photo, and that causes issues for a lot of these news agencies. And you may have heard in the news about certain photojournalists that have been fired or reprimanded for altering the photos to make the scenes look more dramatic or more intense than they actually are. There's quite a code of conduct for photojournalists where they can only manipulate or edit a photo so much. And one of the extreme manipulations, you can turn it into black and white, and that's fine, that's acceptable. But you can't untruthfully alter the colors. You can either make it black and white or truthful color. You can adjust levels and contrast. Maybe a little bit of saturation, but that's really the extent of it. You can also maybe do some noise cleanup, but don't remove logos, don't remove people, don't alter the image in any way that makes the scene look untruthful. Is that even a word? Yeah.
One of the things that comes up a lot for us in the editing department is sepia tone. That's a really common one. HDR and sepia are the two that we see a lot of. And a lot of people say, but when I apply sepia tone, it's not really changing the facts. It doesn't change the facts of the scene. How is it untruthful? And it's untruthful in the sense that it doesn't change the photo, the facts in the photo, But sepia is often used to imply age. It creates a vintage effect.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that sense, it's creating, you know, a vintage look. So when you look at the image, you don't know if it's current, you don't know if it was shot 50 years ago. So it does change the photo in that sense. And so that's why we ask that you remove it.
And what helps us sell these photos too is having great titles and descriptions when you upload the photo to 500px. And so what happens is a lot of our editorial buyers will go to the 500px photo page and look at those descriptions in order to get context on the photo. Where was it taken? When was it taken? What is this of? And a lot of editorial buyers will actually walk away from a photo if it doesn't have enough information, or sometimes we actually will reach out to the photographer and say, hey, can you give us some context on this photo? Can you confirm that it was shot here or there or then? And so just having that information in the title and description is very helpful when submitting editorial photos. And so going back to the slide, Heather's put together again some more examples of editorial usage.
So a lot of times these images are getting picked up for newspaper and magazine articles. They sort of give the visual context to articles, and they're used as editorial features, blogs or websites, news broadcasts, documentaries, educational materials such as textbooks, essays, and journals. Any way that's sort of educational, informative.
And we should clarify that by blogs, we don't mean just any old blog. It has to be a blog that actually is writing an article, a newsworthy article about something. So it can't even be an advertorial. Like, it can't be a commercial for a product that's pretending to be a news article. That's pretty common nowadays. It's called an advertorial. And in our license agreement, we actually specifically prohibit editorial photos from being used in an advertorial context, because that infringes on trademarks and likenesses, like we mentioned before, that are featured in that photo. And so we should explain that there are obviously some exceptions to this, and it's not sort of a carte blanche on shooting everything that you can't get a release for.
Also, just before we go into that, just about subjects, kind of the subject matter too. We should quickly talk about that, because most of the time, what we're looking for, in fact, all the time really, when we say that the images have to have some sort of newsworthy value, because they are being picked up by news magazines and whatnot, we really want subjects that cover things like stories of human interest, current events, lifestyle, travel, culture, business, sports. These are the kind of things that are going to get picked up by newspapers. Like, it's that kind of content that we need to see. That's the kind of relevance that we're looking for.
And for us, because we're not a newswire service, things like lifestyle, travel, culture, and sports, they're almost timeless, in the sense that somebody can use them for years after they've been shot, and they don't really have a time worth to them, because we don't really cater to that newswire service type market just yet. So, well, all right, let's talk about exceptions.
All right, so there's a couple of exceptions, and one of them is children. This is a really sensitive area, obviously. If you're photographing children, especially when they're on their own, they're not with a parent, they're not with other kids, there has to be really, really strong concept. It has to be, just a message. There has to be a clear,
very clear editorial
context. Yeah. It has to have editorial value. There has to be some sort of cultural or socioeconomic importance. There has to be something that is going to give it newsworthy importance. It can't just be a nice portrait of a kid. We see that a lot, and it doesn't mean that your photo is not great, but we just can't take the chance. We can't take the chance.
A lot of parents and societies are very, very sensitive to their children being photographed by strangers, and that's something that we're sensitive to. It's not only a cultural, but it's a legal concern in a lot of states, and so that's why we're very, very careful when we accept editorial photos of children. It has to be very clear that it is an editorial photo and it has an editorial purpose, and it's not just a photo of just some random kid, and that there is some kind of context to it. So if it's your own child or you know the child, then please make the effort to get a release. make that photo available for commercial usage, you'll have much greater opportunity to license that photo, and you'll be covered and know that, that you have the permission of the parental guardian to take a photo of their child. So
the other thing is, nowadays with our digital app for one, and there's some other apps out there that have foreign translations if you're worried about that.
For releases.
For releases. Some people think that there's just no chance of ever getting a release for travel photography or street photography, but there's no harm in asking. Like, people can say no, but there's no harm in asking, and people do. Like, we've had people ask for releases, and we've received releases for shots we would never expect, and it happens from time to time, so there is no harm in asking. It's good to be aware of that. So the other exception is ticketed events and locations, and this is mostly professional sports, the matches, the venues, performances, Broadway shows, concerts, this kind of thing. And if there's an event or a location, a museum that charges an admission fee, then they generally have restrictions in place for photography.
Yeah. If you check their website, check the back of your ticket, just even ask the person at the door, the question you want to ask them is commercial photography allowed here?
Yeah.
Again, and that's the verbiage, that's the vocabulary that this industry uses, and you basically say, can I shoot commercial photography here? And that will tell you right away whether or not you can use these photos. Now, they will actually allow certain photographers with accreditation to enter into these venues or these events, like you've seen in the fashion show pits, or in a sports event, you'll have a pit of photographers. Those photographers have explicit permission to be there. They've declared where and how the photos are going to be used that they take. Usually they're associated with a newspaper or a news service or news wire, and that's why they have the permission to shoot there. And so if you have that permission, if you have that press pass, then just attach it to the photo as a property release. If it's for editorial usage, and we'll take it, we'll accept it. But we need to know that you had permission to be there, to shoot there for that purpose. Generally, emails that you have with the promoter won't really work. We need to see some kind of formal letterhead. When you get accreditation to these events, you will actually receive this on purpose. A lot of news agencies, that's what they expect. It's sort of a run-of-the-mill way of getting accreditation to be a photographer at these events. So this generally covers closed events, or ticketed events, as Heather said. So basically, if you have to get admission into something, or it's a private venue or a closed event, then try to get that accreditation, show us that accreditation, and then we can make those photos available for editorial use. But if you're just there at a concert with your point and shoot or cell phone, you're gonna have a really hard time trying to license that content legally.
Yeah, and the same goes for trade shows, like car shows, conventions, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you'll see right there on your ticket or on the website for the event that there's no commercial photography allowed, or photography with permission, or maybe they'll say personal use photography allowed. So again, that's only for personal use. You can't go ahead and license the photos after the fact. And we've had photographers that reach out after the fact to a promoter and get permission, but we need to see that permission. We need to see that that correspondence. Picture show?
Yeah, we have a couple of slides to sort of show the difference here. Do we have those up? Yeah, we've got one here. Great. Okay, so the first one we're looking at is a studio shot, and this person is released, obviously. So we've got a signed model release. It's a studio shot. So this is the kind of portrait we would expect to be available for commercial use.
Obviously staged, looking at the camera, knows that she's having her photo taken. And now if she went and saw this photo being used for commercial purposes, she would know, oh yeah, I signed a release for this. I've given my permission for my likeness to be used for commercial purposes. She probably wouldn't use that language, but something like that.
Yeah. And the following slide is from the Holy Festival, which is where they throw that colored powder around, which was the inspiration for the previous image that we just looked at. And in this shot, it is clearly editorial. And so this is the difference. These people are unreleased. It's a spontaneous moment. It's a cultural event that is relevant, it's newsworthy. You know, this is, you know, main point is that it's unreleased, so we can't license it commercially. These people are recognizable, so we would have to license this editorially. But it also hits those other points. It's not just about being unreleased. It's also a cultural event that we feel has editorial value. So
we have one more photo to go through, and then we'll start taking questions. So if you're watching this live, please be sure to either tweet us or on the G Plus Hangout to just post your questions, and we'll get through those as soon as we right after the next slide. So one more. So here we go. We have a logo and we have a bunch of people.
Yeah, so this one here obviously has a logo in it. So we, in this case, you know, we wouldn't want the logo to be removed. You would just leave it in there, no retouching. And again, people are unreleased, and it's not so much of a post shot, but it's got cultural relevance. There's a clear message, there's a clear concept there about communication and technology, and it's a really interesting and engaging moment. So it's not just about being unreleased, because one of the things that we often see is images that come in that are unreleased, and we often reject them when we ask for a release, and they come back in marked as editorial, and it might be someone's friend or sister or someone they know, and they just haven't got the release. And it's just not suitable because there's no newsworthy value to it. So there has to be more to it than that. It has to have that value. It can't just be a portrait. It can't just be a vague image. There has to be context. And here, there's a whole load of context. So this is the kind of thing that we're looking for.
Yeah, this is the kind of stuff that sells.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Joe off our G Plus page, and he's asking if he has a generic release that he uses with other agencies, will we accept it at 500px? And the answer is yes, in the sense that we follow certain guidelines and standards that most other stock photo agencies do when it comes to release. So we look for very specific language. And so 99% of the times, especially if it's another release by another agency, we will accept it. 500px is part of DMLA, which is the Digital Media Licensing Association, that has a very standard legal language in the text of their model releases, and you'll see that in about 5 or 6 other stock photo agencies. So we do follow the same standards as most other agencies, so we will accept the release. All right. Do we have any more questions, or? Oh, it's easy. That's clear.
Easy. It's the quickest question and answer period ever.
So yeah, just remember that commercial photography, commercial use has a much wider usage, much greater chance of selling. But that's not to say that there isn't value in editorial photos, but those editorial photos have to have newsworthy, journalistic, or educational context and worth to them. So when you're shooting that stuff, just think to yourself, what kind of story can be written about this? What information can I include in the title and description to give this photo more value and to make it have greater salability? And yeah, just get those releases. Check out our releases app. If you just go to your iOS app store and type in releases, you should see releases by 500px. And on Android, we support the Easy Releases app. So make sure you submit those model releases.
And if you have any questions, if you're unsure if something is suitable for editorial or if it can be used commercially, you can always email our crime support team at crime@500px.com. So we'll always get back to you. So send us your questions.
Great. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thanks guys. Bye.